What's happening, fight fans? Boxing and Bagels returns, but not really early in the day. It's a little bit later than normal because I had a ton of stuff to do. Had big fights last night over in Berwick. We had the amateur boxing, and so I got in really late. I was keeping up with Kevin and when you were on the live yesterday, which was very well done. But of course, we're going to talk about UFC 308 last night with my man Kevin Iole from KevinIole.com. Kevin, what's happening this morning?
I am doing great. It's been a good day so far, almost noon, and been a good day so far, and hope it continues. And tomorrow night on a Monday, we get a Steeler win. That would be a good thing.
Well, that's asking for a lot there.
Well, we're only playing the New York Giants, so it shouldn't be asking too much.
Well, I'm not a New York Giants fan, but I'm a Jets fan. So either or, last week was a rough one for us.
Yes.
God. Oh, God. It couldn't be a worse year this year. They thought they were going to have a good year last year. Rodgers heard some stuff. He think this year we're going to have a great year. This is where we come together. And, of course, nothing. Fire the head coach. It's just, this whole scenario is bad. But either way, Kevin, you were live yesterday during the fights. After the fights, we were contacting each other during the fights. But it was kind of, and you'll see in the thumbnail, I said it's either an end of an era, it may be, or is it the start of a new era? Let's take the first undercard. Hamzat. You don't pronounce that K?
No pronounce. Okay. Hamzat Chimaev.
Chimaev. Well, I like him, and I've always put him as one of my favorite ones. But an interesting fight. At first, I didn't know what happened to Robert Whitaker. I didn't know. It was a quick tap out, but obviously with the picture that was circulating around, a different scenario. What was your thoughts on that when you saw it?
Yeah, I mean, Dana White said it at the post-fight press conference. Right away, I said, Chimaev has his back and he's going for the choke. And you see, he gets the arm up, kind of across the chin. Mm-hmm. And that move is called a face crank. And that is the move that Khabib Nurmagomedov used to submit Conor McGregor. That can be a very painful move, but it usually takes a little bit to get put in. Hamzat put that face crank on, and immediately Whitaker tapped, and that just shows you the incredible amount of strength that Hamzat Chimaev has. He is a massively strong guy, and I think he would be strong if he was fighting at 205, let alone 185. And boy, oh boy, Robert Whitaker, one of the best, not only of now but of all time. And he just toyed with him, George. I mean, he just absolutely destroyed him.
When you first saw him coming out, when it first circulated, that first couple seconds of the fight, it didn't last long. 303, I believe it was the first round. Did Whitaker look good? Did you seem like, hey, this guy might give him something?
I thought Whitaker looked great all week. I thought he was in good spirits, and he has subsequently said since that he had no excuses, that he was ready, that he had a good training camp, that he was ready to roll. But Chimaev just was on top of his game. The thing, I had written a column in the summer when Chimaev had to pull out of the first fight with Robert Whitaker, and I talked about, I wonder if we'll ever see Hamzat Chimaev that we grew to love again. Because, his health was not there. He had that bout with long COVID. So he had really bad COVID for a really long period of time. It caused him to miss a number of fights. Then, his health was just questionable. It was causing him to pull out. And he was in the hospital 3 times in May and June of this year, when before he was supposed to fight Whitaker. And they finally realized, well, he can't go that way. So they changed up his team, and it turned out he was training himself to exhaustion. So he was training 5 and 6 times a day and just going as absolutely hard as he could go. And the body, as you know, needs recovery time. And he just didn't give himself that, and he was making himself sick. And, so my concern going into the fight, I picked Chimaev to win, but my concern with that pick, is he going to be healthy? Is he going to be the same guy that he once was, or have all these bouts taken out of him? But when you saw him come to the ring, he ran. Remember, he sprinted. He almost knocked the security guard over when he came out. I kind of thought, okay, that's Hamzat, and he's back, and that is the Hamzat that we normally see. The fight was a 3-minute, 34-second fight. And Hamzat, if you look at UFCstats.com, Hamzat had 3 minutes and 20 seconds of control. So there was only 14 seconds in the fight where Hamzat did not have control.
Yeah, as you were saying about that, I thought the dominance that he had was very evident. Now, is that how dominant he was, or was Whitaker not in what we're seeing now is towards the end of the career?
No. I mean, we may be seeing toward the end of the career of Whitaker, but George, that was just what Chimaev does when he's healthy. I mean, if you look, I'm just pulling his stats up now, and I'm just going to go through this. And this is what really, when you look at this, what is really amazing. So, Khamzat Chimaev's first fight in the UFC was on July 15th against a guy named John Phillips. Chimaev lands 43 significant strikes. You want to take a guess how many John Phillips landed?
2.
1. Then his next fight, so he comes back, he wins that fight by a submission with a Darce choke. His next fight is 10 days later, July 25th, 2020.
Right.
He's fighting a guy named Reese McKee.
Jeez.
Khamzat lands 40 significant strikes in that fight. Reese McKee,
2.
0. So after 2 fights in his UFC career, Khamzat has landed 83 significant strikes, and his opponents have landed 1. Then that takes us, I'm going to give you 2 more, and then we'll get out of here. That takes us to his 3rd career fight, September 19th, or 3rd career UFC fight. September 19th, 2020, he fights Gerald Meerschaert. So Meerschaert, a respected veteran, is tied for the UFC middleweight lead all time in most submissions. That fight lasted 17 seconds. Chimaev knocked him out with 1 punch. Chimaev 4 significant strikes, Meerschaert 0 significant strikes. And then we go to the October 30th, 2021. He fights Li Jingliang at UFC 267. Khamzat 25 significant strikes, Li Jingliang 0. So after 4 fights, Khamzat Chimaev landed 112 significant strikes, and his opponents landed 1.
Now, was that? Let me ask you with that situation. Is that because he's overwhelming? He just overwhelms people, or because he really?
It's mostly ground punches,
right? He wasn't like he's not the greatest boxer, really. If you think about it, he's going to grapple you and get you to the ground, but he can strike.
Yeah, but he has a lot of power, George. He's a very, very hard hitter, and his boxing. You have to understand in MMA. Everything is based on what else you have to defend, right? So everybody knows when they face Khamzat, he's kind of like gold medal level wrestling. So as a result of that, you have to really be geared toward not getting taken down. And when that happens, it makes his striking a lot better, right? So now all of a sudden, he's landing shots that, maybe he wouldn't land on you if it was a boxing match because you're worried about the takedown. He comes in there and does that. And I just think that, he has that combination of great power, great wrestling, and unbelievable submissions. That's a really hard combination to beat.
Oh, it certainly is. So where do you see the 2 guys going right after this? Whitaker and Chimaev.
Whitaker is going to be an interesting question. I mean, he says he will be back. You saw the face, and it's going to take him a while to come back, right? So I don't think we will see Whitaker 6 or 9 months. I think it's going to be a year before we see Robert Whitaker. And even though he says he's coming back, it makes me wonder if he doesn't walk away, in that sometime in the next couple of months, because, at this point, it's pretty clear he's not going to get another title shot, right? So, he last held the title in 2019. His 3 losses since then came to Dricus du Plessis, who is the current champion. Israel Adesanya beat him twice, who is the former champion. And Khamzat Chimaev yesterday, who is probably the future champion. So, I think that his days of getting title shots are probably over. And so he's just going to have to fight, just normal fights. Does he want to hang around and do that? That's going to be the question. It wouldn't shock me if he comes to the conclusion that, you know what, I've done enough in this sport and I'm going to walk away now.
Okay. And what does it live Shemaev? I mean, I would obviously think GDP would be in line for, I mean, that looks like it has to come down to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's the fight to make too. You know, Strickland was promised the fight. Strickland lost the title to DDP in a very good fight.
So,
It was close. You can make an argument that Strickland won. And now you're talking about Strickland DDP rematch. But based on what Chimaev did, boy, I'll tell you what, Dana White and Hunter Campbell have some things to think about.
let me ask you this: wouldn't you want Strickland Chimaev to be the title shot, or to be the? Because if I'm not saying DDP's bad, but I'm talking about in a strictly money market big fight thing. Wouldn't you rather have Strickland and Chimaev fight at some point? So maybe give Strickland a fight, DDP, see if he can get that belt, and then fight Strickland.
Well, I mean, I think the UFC. You could guarantee he fights both if you give Chimaev the fight with DDP now, because here, if Strickland wins, then if Strickland fights DDP, he would have to beat Duplessis for him to get the fight with Strickland, right? If he, with Chimaev. So if Strickland beats Duplessis, then he becomes the champion. And depending on how close that fight is, they may be talking about a rubber match because they'd be 1-1 at that time. But let's assume that there wouldn't be a rubber match. Then he could, Strickland could defend the belt against Chimaev as the champion. But now let's say that, Strickland loses to DDP. Well, then you're going to have Chimaev, come in and fight DDP at that point. And now Strickland has a loss, and he has the two losses, so you'd be 1-2 in his last 3 fights. I doubt that you would put him up against Chimaev. I think the best way for them to do it would be to have Chimaev take the next fight and Strickland faces the winner. And that in that case, then, you give yourself the best chance to get Strickland versus Chimaev for the title fight, while also getting DDP Strickland for a title fight.
Has Dana said anything about that Strickland fighting for DDP being a definite or no?
At the last Contender Series event, I asked him that question. So that was it'll be 2 weeks on Tuesday. So 12 days ago. And I said, is the plan still to do Strickland and DDP? And he said, yes.
Well, I don't think he expected the Whitaker.
Yeah.
Go the way it went. Well, let's turn our attention to the main event. Kind of a disappointing thing for me, only because Max Holloway, big fan. I'm a big fan of Max Holloway. I did think that this was his kryptonite coming up because of the youth and the speed, and of course the power. And I thought Max was doing okay. Thought he did okay the first couple rounds. I thought, okay, Max is getting in his groove, and then out of nowhere, left hook comes and that put the lights out for Max Holloway. I've never seen him like that before. He was
never been dropped before.
Yeah, I mean, he was shook a little bit right before he went down, got hit with the hook. He was shook a little bit, but then he really went out with that hook. My question to you is this: now, does that push Topuria now to being now he's on a superstar level where they're going to push him to fight now? Let's say Spain, they're really pushing that rocket right behind him, because he not only does he have the look, he's got the belt, he has the country behind him. He definitely is a guy they could hook their wagon to now.
Yeah, I think he is. My column that I wrote after the fight was saying I thought Chimaev and Topuria both became major superstars with the way that fight played out. Like you look at Topuria, he's a knockout puncher, but he's 16-0 with 14 finishes. He's knocked out Volkanovski and Holloway in his last 2 fights, which, my God, you're talking about 2 of the greatest to ever do it. And he's charismatic. He's multilingual. I think he speaks 4 languages. He is an incredible guy, really good looking kid, well dressed. I mean, I'd like to meet the tailor that he's using. Really good. His suits are nice and everything. He's a guy that I think they can promote. And I will just disagree with one thing you said. I thought the right hand that he threw before the left hook was the one that really finished the fight. If you looked at Max's eyes, his eyes rolled back in his head and he stumbled backwards. The left hook dropped him, but I thought that right hand, the fight was over when he landed that right hand.
Okay, because that left was the one that when he hit him, that dropped him though. But I think you are
Max
right.
staggered back against the cage after
no,
the right.
Now that I think about it, I think you are right with that. And I never seen Max like that. It was kind of sad,
Never.
honestly, when I said, wow, I can't. So that shows you Topuria must have pretty good power because he hung in there with Gaethje swinging for the fence. I mean, guys that really could bang, and he stood right in there. This was a one-punch kind of knockout after the right hand. I mean, it was kind of sad to see it. And that's why I said in the thumbnail, is this the end of his end of an era, not career, end of an era where you got, because when I spoke to you before the fight, I thought Max looked very old to me. He looked old, and to fight a guy this young and this, I was kind of, and a weight class down. I believe he could have fought at the 55, but I thought it was a little too much for a guy that old. Does Max what does Max go from here?
He said it's not a funeral, and he said, sometimes you win them and sometimes you lose them, and he expects to be back and fighting in July. So, depending on what happens, maybe he'll get another fight with Volkanovski. Who knows? But I think he's, Max wants to continue to fight. I think he should fight at 155. I think that at this point, he's not going to win the 145-pound title. I think he's better off. He'll be a factor at 155. A lot of good fights for him, guys that he hasn't fought. He's beaten most of the contenders at 145. So I think, see him in July moving up to 155. I think that's really, the next move for him.
Let me ask you, this is a wild out of the park question. What about Conor McGregor?
For Max?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, McGregor, I think, is going to fight in March, right? That is kind of the tentative plan. If they can get McGregor clean and training and, all the other stuff happening that they need to get done, I think that, the plan would be for Conor to fight in March in Las Vegas. I don't think Max can make it back that quickly, right? I think that'd be asking a little bit much because, if you watch that fight, I thought early on, he wasn't wobbled like he was by the final right hand and then left hook dropped him. But you could see he was feeling those punches last night, which he normally did not do. I thought, George, from the first round on, the power was a factor there, right? And I thought that was something that, Topuria, I question whether Topuria's power was legit to take out somebody like Max. Can't question it anymore.
But was that more to do with the weight cut? I thought, because I mean, you thought he legitimately,
because Max always looks like that, right? So years ago I would see Max looking like that. I go, oh my God, he's in big trouble. But then you see him over time and you realize that's just how he looks when he's cutting weight, right?
I'm more saying like the punch resilience that he had, because you were saying he was getting wobbled a little bit in the beginning, and I saw that too. I thought he was a little bit off. Could that be something to do with the weight cut? Only because
I don't think so. I just think it's because Topuria is such a hard hitter. I mean,
you think he hits that hard?
We see the evidence in front of us. Look at all the knockouts that he has, right? So Topuria has now got 9 submissions and 5 knockouts in 16 fights. So 14 finishes in 16 fights, and he's knocked out Volkanovski and Holloway back to back. At us. I mean, wow, that's just, I think that's just telling you this guy has got unnatural power.
That's 2 Hall of Famers back to back. And
yeah,
was Volk ever finished like that?
No. Well, I mean, by Makhachev, up.
Right.
Makhachev beat him in his previous fight, knocked him out. But, not at featherweight, he was not.
Yeah.
So,
wow. That goes to show you the kind of, and I really think he's going to be the next superstar coming down the pipe here as the guy they're going to push, because they love his style, knockout kind of guy. And you're right, the trash talk is pretty good too. He actually is pretty good. He's pretty good at that.
He's got it all. I mean, he's a good.
You want that kind of package in a guy that you want to really push to the forefront. Dana White is really good at making these stars, but the credit goes to some of these people who actually go after that brass ring and go take and do the things that normal fighters wouldn't do.
Yeah, the UFC gives them a platform, and then like you look at Conor McGregor. He took that platform from his first fight in the UFC, where most people over here, that was his first fight in the UFC was 13 years ago, 12 years ago. And most people who were UFC fans, they didn't follow Cage Warriors, especially then. And they didn't know that he was a champion in a regional organization. They never heard of the guy. The first they see him is this compelling story that he has, that he was on food stamps before the fight, and how he basically had no money when he made the drive to Sweden to get to the fight. He performs great, and then he's great on the microphone, and the rest, as they say, is history. And I think that's the thing, right? The UFC will give you a platform, and they can make you to a certain level of star, but you have to take yourself to that. All the people who became what we would think of as the most massive stars, I think the vast majority of them did through their power. Like, I'm trying to think. So Ronda Rousey would probably be the number 2 biggest star, right? She sold a shitload of pay-per-views. And Rhonda just had that way, she knew how to talk. Of course, she was finishing people, right? And so that helped and everything. But I think her ability, and she knew how to move the needle and how to do that. And you look at most of their stars, and that's sort of where they came from. Maybe Anderson Silva not. Anderson Silva was a knockout machine, and he was, he was not speaking much English when he first came around. And yet he still became huge. But you have to have some ability and some presence to make it to that next level up.
Let me ask you, Kevin, before we wrap up, and this is a question I want to ask you. We had and it's it's called Boxing and Bagels, but we had this conversation yesterday. Boxing is kind of just dead right now, and it goes in ebbs and flows. It's like the wrestling, WWF. It goes in ebbs and flows because you get a superstar. But this is a little different, a little bit different. And maybe correct me if I'm wrong, because I was thinking about this yesterday. Is it the fact that the money that is they're generating, and it's only a few of the top ones, the Bud Crawfords, the Tanks, the Ryan Garcias, the Canelos, that get those big paychecks, okay? They're fighting the once a year, twice a year max. They're not. Is the amount of money that's because most boxers come from out of necessity. Not like these UFC fighters where they got a college degree and they go wrestling college, and it's a little different. Now, maybe some in the other countries a little different, maybe. Why is money with Turkey LSU coming in now with this money, and I don't know how long that's gonna last, because at some point, and even the shows aren't that compelling. Good fights, but just not compelling for me. They're more concerned about it being a show than a boxing event, and that drives people away. It drives me away because I don't watch it. Is the amount of money that's being influxed to the top 2 or 3 people, maybe 4, is that really hurting right now to the promoters in the United States, and just them not being able to put these fights together? Because I mean, we can't have a show here without. We're talking about UFC on a Boxing and Bagel show when the platform is around boxing, and it gets to a point where it gets to be like, is this really what we want to talk about?
Well, here's the problem in boxing right now. So the money creates some issues, but I don't think the money necessarily are what the issues are, right? So boxing has had a long time, maybe 25 years. Your top stars don't want to fight often anymore, right? So they, just go back to the 80s, which I know it's, 40 years ago, but if we go to the 80s, when the rise of Mike Tyson comes, Sugar Ray Leonard, Marvin Hagler's, that was his peak period, the rise of Thomas Hearns, the rise of Roberto Duran. Duran was the great lightweight, but when he went to welterweight is when he became the legend and his career took off. Alexis Arguello, Aaron Pryor, all those fights happened in the 80s. Boom Boom Mancini, Salvador Sanchez, and look how often those guys fought. And they weren't fighting B-level fighters. They were fighting A-level guys, right? So you would have A plus A plus A plus B, A plus A plus B, A plus. They were fighting on a regular basis against all the top guys. And now you come and, you look, and whoever you want to pick as the top guy, like, so Canelo fights Max twice a year, and he's fighting. Look at these guys. All of a sudden, he started to fight. The one thing that you could have said about Canelo for most of his career is he fought challenges that he didn't have to fight, that he sought out guys, and now he's kind of taken on. He's looking to get the most money for the least risk, and that doesn't make the sport all that compelling. And so that, I think, is one of the biggest things. The money hurts only from the standpoint that if you there's no requirement how often they fight, right? So I think, hey, they're taking a risk, and I've always said this, and I will stick by this now. I want to see these fighters who are taking a risk get taken care of, not just Terrence Crawford and Naoya Inoue and Canelo and whoever else, but all the people, right? But you have to give us a product as the consumer. We love this because we love to see great talent going up against each other. Give us the two people that we want to see, and then put them in good fights consistently. That's what the UFC does, right? And they're good at matchmaking, and they evenly match fighters. And let's see those kind of fights in boxing on a regular basis. And if we had Crawford fight 4 or 5 times a year, how much better for boxing would that be if we had Canelo 3, 4, 5 times a year, and you just go down the list of the people, Alexander Usyk and Fury and all those guys. I think that, that would be something. The secondary thing that's the problem in it is because those guys are making so much money, their PR people are afraid of them, and they have no incentive, especially now with Turkey, provide such money. They have no incentive to work for their money, right? Before they used to work because they had to sell pay-per-views, and that they get a lot of their money on the back end. And they don't have that now. And so they just say, screw it, I'm not doing interviews. And so they think that you're going to show up and buy tickets and watch. But look at Crawford's show in August 3rd, that show. It was a freaking disaster. And what was the one common denominator? Crawford didn't do any interviews, right? Nothing. And you look at it, and Madrimov wasn't going to help, right? Madrimov's not an English speaker. He wasn't a known guy here, even though he was a good fighter. People in the U.S. didn't know him, but if you wanted to make that a big event, you had to get Terrence Crawford front and center. And he basically said screw it. And his publicist said screw it, and they just went out there and they didn't try to push it, and they didn't try to make it become a special event. And when you do that, you hurt your business. And so Terrence Crawford's going to bank his money, but maybe the sport's not going to be the same for his kids when his kids come along and want to box.
Well, no, what I looked at too is even if Bud had a stay busy fight with a lesser opponent, like a Stevie Forbes back in the day, De La Hoya fought Stevie Forbes, on HBO for free, or those little fights that you kind of stay busy. That means something, maybe top 10 or top 15, which is fine. You're not going to make a killing of the money, but you put your product out there, like you said. Yeah. I remember when he fought Spence, he was on Joe Rogan's podcast not long yet. Then crickets for like a year. You didn't hear him. Yeah. So he had an opportunity at that point. I think they're hurting themselves by not, especially in the social media world. I mean, could you imagine Ali with social media? Could you imagine these people? Oh. It would have been incredible. And you would have really stamped your legacy as the.
Well, let's take this right now. Let's take who are the best fighters in the world. So Usyk, Crawford, Naoya Inoue, Beterbiev, Canelo, Bivol, and Gervonta Davis. So there's 7 guys. Let's take how popular they are, add it together, and multiply by 5, and they're still not even close to Muhammad Ali. And what Muhammad Ali did, and what the demands on him were, and Ali was freaking everywhere, right? Ali was on the Tonight Show and the Dick Cavett show and the Mike Douglas show and the Merv Griffin show, and he went all around the world, and he would appear on TV and do interviews, and he appeared on wrestling matches, and he made himself into a superstar. Yeah. He was a great fighter, but he made himself into a superstar through sheer force of personality. And these other guys don't do it. And, that is a big, big, big problem. And, if you take it and you say, hey, I know going in my pro boxing career is going to be short. And yes, you want to be the best possible boxer you can be, and you got to work hard to get there. but you have plenty of time to sit there and say, I'm going to talk to the media. I'm going to put myself out there. I'm going to, get a very smart PR person who knows how to build. Fred Sternberg is a great example of that person. If you hire Fred Sternberg and you listen to him and you take his advice and you follow what he says, you will become somebody in boxing, whether you can fight or not. Right. Now, if you can fight more, it's going to be better. But whether you can fight or not, Fred Sternberg, if you listen to him, he can make you into a star. And you need fighters that understand that. But these fighters today, they don't care. They say, hey, I'll make my $7 million and I'll be gone. But what happens, and this is what makes me feel sad, not all of them, but a lot of them will spend all that money before they're 40. They won't have any of it. And then they're trying to get comeback fights. They're trying to sign autographs and they're trying to do things to make money when they could have made so much money during their career if they had just thought about how to position themselves perfectly.
But even so, when their career's over, if they hook onto a brand, a Nike, a Reebok, an Under Armour, that's like down the road stuff. They could have those residuals come in afterwards. But if they're a big star, Michael Jordan makes billions of dollars because of his sneaker that he has now, and he hasn't played in years. They don't think about the long term because they think all this money is still going to be here. And that's the one I'm really disappointed is Tank Davis. Tank Davis goes away. He just goes away. And I get it. He doesn't like to be. He's like, I'm not only going to be in this for too much longer. I get that. But the residual stuff that they can get, and Terrence Crawford has been very smart with his money. I know he has a lot of real estate. So yes, he probably doesn't need it. But the residuals at the end of your career, and this window is small. They're doing them a disservice not to get out there in the public. Like, who wouldn't want, if you're a fighter, and Fred Sternberg is a perfect example. Fred's going to push this guy to go on these shows. He's going to push him in Media Row. Get on these shows. At the end of the day, you're going to have much more notoriety, and you're going to be someone who's in demand, not like 10 years down the road where you're sitting there at a autograph signing Comic-Con, sitting there for $5. It's a stupid thing to think about. They got to think of long term.
100%. I could not agree with you more. And it also, like, I look at it and I say, journalism has been great to me. And, boxing has been good to me, right? I have had a good career covering boxing and MMA. But if we're just going to eliminate MMA and let's just talk boxing, I mean, hey, I am grateful for the people I met in boxing and what I've been able to accomplish. And so, I understand that the demands on me are infinitesimal compared to the demands on world champion boxers. But I never say no to anybody. So if somebody wants to interview me, I will say yes. And I have done so many interviews with so many people because I say, I'm looking to get people to talk to me. And if I want to talk to them and I have to rely on them saying yes, and then hopefully they'll do it with me. If somebody has the interest in talking to me, I'm going to say yes so that they can get what they need. And I look at it as giving, I'm not making money for that, but I'm trying to give back to the sport and give back to journalism. And I think the fighters should realize that, hey, if you're making 7 figures, this sport has given you a life that you could not have imagined years ago, right? And so do something for the sport and leave it in a better place than you found it. But unfortunately, the managers don't think that way for the most part, and the fighters don't think that way. And we have a dearth of good publicists. Fred Sternberg is there, but there's very few publicists that are worth their salt.
And that hurts us all in the long run.
Yep.
Well, Kevin, I'm going to wrap this up. Big fights last night. I didn't get to tell you. Aubrey did lose a decision. We had 3 fighters who won by knockout: JJ Snyder, David, and Dimitri. So it was 4-2 fight, 4-2 record. But you win some, you lose some. Hometown too.
Well, I'm going to say Coach Leo needs to get her in the gym.
Well, she was. It did see. I'm not going to call her out on it, but she was huffing and puffing after that first round, and she knew it. I talked to her back in the locker room. She said, I just didn't have enough. And she's got a kid, and, so it's a lot for her. But as always, Kevin Iole from KevinIole.com. Kevin Iole on his YouTube channel, like I told you, growing like crazy. He had a live. You're going to have another couple of lives coming up soon. Any word on when you're getting the next live? Is it going to be a Tuesday?
Might do Tuesday, so have not determined that yet. I will have Dana live before the New York show. Not sure Dana White. I'm not sure what day that is going to be. We just had logistics problems getting it together with him in Abu Dhabi and me being over here and not being in Abu Dhabi. But we will get Dana before New York, so we'll have a live with Dana. I may do a live before that, so we can do it. And I'm going to have John Jones on before too much longer. So you want to stay tuned for that.
All right. So Kevin Iole from KevinIole.com, but Kevin Iole on his YouTube channel. Like and subscribe to the channel. Kevin, as always, it's always good to have you filling in for Coach Diz.
Thank you, brother. Anytime.
All right.
Thanks for watching the Zapata Brand podcast. Please subscribe to the podcast and listen where all podcasts are.